Okay, now we're going to review the newest release, which is Snow White and the Huntsman. Justin?
At this point, Snow White has been done many times. We should all be overly familiar with it. But since this is a new interpretation of it, we'll go ahead and tell the story of their take on it at least. In a faraway kingdom lives a king and his queen and his beautiful daughter named Snow White. The queen dies. The king is distraught. In the midst of this, an invading army attacks. His people fend them off. In a pretty impressive CGI display of the enemy forces being shattered into bits as his forces attack. Once the fight's over, the king finds a cart, a wagon that's been locked up, and when he opens it, he finds this pretty sad-looking Charlize Theron. It looks like she's been a slave of these people. They free her. And of course, as fairy tales often do, the romance is quick between her character, Ravenna, and the king. They're married practically the next day. That night on their wedding bed, the Ravenna kills the king, takes the kingdom. And of course, from there, you've got Snow White held captive for a good long while until the queen learns that her being the fairest of them all will soon end, and Kristen Stewart's Snow White will be taking over that particular title unless the queen takes her heart and consumes her, making her eternally beautiful. Luckily, Snow White makes her escape. From there, the queen hires the Huntsman to hunt her down because Snow White ran into the dark forest where the queen has no magic. So she has to send someone in who's been there. Chris Hemsworth, a Huntsman, has been there. He goes in, finds her. There's lots of things that go on. I don't want to spoil any of it, but that's the basic gist of the story. There's also, of course, 7 dwarves, all sorts of other fairy tale creatures. I'm curious to see what you guys think before I go into it. So, Aaron, I know you were quick to ask me what I thought, so let me be quick to ask you, what do you think?
I was really looking forward to this more than Prometheus or anything else. It just looked visually beautiful. The beginning of the film I thought was fantastic. I think the first probably 30 minutes where they set up the queen and how Snow White's situation and how the queen gains the throne and everything else, beautifully done. Just loved it. I thought it was epic storytelling at its finest. And then, I don't know what happened. It just got boring. Charlize Theron, fantastic. I thought she tore this role apart like I haven't seen done in a long time. She's a rare, memorable villain. I think she owns the movie. She's the only character you're going to remember when you walk away from it. So that is impressive in itself. The movie itself is shot very beautifully. I mean, the visuals and the special effects are fantastic. It's probably one of the best looking movies I've seen all year. The problem with Rupert Sanders is the guy's name that directed it. The problem that I have is the story. He did not really bring the characters to life outside of the queen. The story is kind of bland. The romance that's very prominent in the actual, the fairy tale is barely even in the movie. There's barely any romance. And granted, I might not strike you as the most romantic fellow in the world, but I wanted that romance because it's part of this story. It seemed to me like they threw in a lot of the Snow White contraptions from the fairy tale just to say, hey, look, see, they're in the story, where they didn't spend a lot of time making them relevant to the story. So, Charlize Theron, fantastic. Kristen Stewart has convinced me that she is simply just not good at acting. I just am, more and more I am convinced the only thing she can play is mopey. She has one speed, and that's mopey. She could be one of the dwarfs, honestly. I really wish she would learn how to lighten the fuck up, because I'm getting sick of every movie I see. She just looks like she wants to cry. Granted, this time she had some reasons to cry, but she's supposed to be the savior that brings the light, the joy, and the happiness. And I see her smile, which, to be honest, she has a beautiful smile. I think if she would just lighten the hell up, she'd probably be fun to watch. But because she's so dour and sad and mopey in everything she does, I just have a hard time getting behind her. Chris Hemsworth, I thought was really just Thor without any humor. He was probably the biggest disappointment for me personally, because I love Chris Hemsworth. I think the guy is just charismatic as hell. I think the director just did not know how to capture him, and I think he just came across as a pretty bland action hero. Nothing special. He didn't hurt the film, he just didn't elevate it a whole lot. But the dwarves, this is the last part, and then I'll let you guys go on. The dwarves, to me, were amazing, because what they did, and I'm sure there's a lot of little actors that are complaining because they didn't get acting jobs because of this, but they took with normal size, I don't know what you say, but regular actors that are not dwarfs. They took non-dwarf actors and they used CGI to dwarf them. So basically, you see them, but they're like Toby Jones. You know, he's a however tall, 5'5", but they shrink him down to like 3.5 feet.
So they pulled a Hobbit on him like they did in Lord of the Rings?
No, but it's not done by a visual aid. You know, in Lord of the Rings, they basically just shot it at a certain angle, and that created that effect. They actually used CGI to make them appear like they were smaller people. It's really cool. It really is really cool. Yeah, They didn't have wonderful personalities, but the effect is very cool. So,
they kind of Steve Rogered them a little.
Yeah, very much like Steve Rogers and Captain America. It's a lot like that. Very cool effect. Like I said, beautiful looking effects were wonderful. Charlie's out of the park. Everything else just average. I gave it 6 out of 10. But I do want to add, that said, my wife loved this movie. She said it was next to Avengers her favorite movie of the year. So, could be just me.
Brian?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that basically kind of sums up everything that I kind of felt about it. Visually beautiful, one of the best, like I say, probably one of the best looking movies, of the year. I thought Charlize Theron was very good. I thought maybe a little bit towards the end she was a bit over the top, but for the most part she, I don't know if she quite stole it. It was either her or the dwarves. I'm not real sure which one I would say stole it, because I was really, I was just blown away by the dwarves for a number of reasons. The fact that like every one of them are pretty well established actors, and for them to take a small role. So, but anyway, it's my problem was I just never felt anything for the actors. I never felt the nervousness, I wasn't scared for them. I wasn't excited for them. I wasn't scared for the hero. Is she going to, complete her mission or whatever? I just didn't care. And I think that was part of probably the same kind of thing that you were talking about with the story.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd give it a 5. It is entertaining, and I recommend seeing it on the big screen, but it's not going to be one of my, year's best.
Yeah. Justin?
I definitely liked it more than you two guys did. Mm-hmm. And I completely disagree with Chris Hemsworth. I thought he did a fantastic job as a Huntsman. In fact, other than Charlize Theron's Ravina, he was probably one of my favorite characters in the whole thing. Whatever failings his character has, I blame on the writing. I don't blame on him. I think he did the absolute best he could with the dialogue and the story that was given to him to do. I think Kristen Stewart, I actually think she can act, and there were several moments in the film where I found her performance rather compelling. Unfortunately, when you are up against someone like Charlize Theron in the role that she's playing, everybody else just kind of has to pale by comparison. There's no other way around it. It's like when we talked about Legend a little while ago. When you've got a Tim Curry dressed up as the Prince of Darkness, I don't care who you put up against him. They're just not going to compete. And her in those outfits with that dialogue, she owned that movie. She was flat out amazing. Everybody else is just going to kind of pale. Kristen Stewart paled. It's just kind of the name of the game, but I didn't think she was necessarily a weak point in the film. For me, it was really the writing that was the biggest weakness in this film. There were a lot of instances of things happening that I didn't see how they could logically happen the way that they did. The romance was not in any way filled out well enough. And it let it down in several areas later on in the film. So really my biggest complaints are purely the writing and the story. Weak, could have been a lot better. But on the plus side, special effects were fantastic. I loved so many of the visual effects they put into the Queen, to the fairy realm, the White Hart, I thought looked amazing. All those things really looked fantastic. But kind of like you guys said, though, it was really the dwarves that shocked me more than anything. The only dwarf I knew was going to be in the movie was Bob Hoskins. So when Ian McShane suddenly showed up and dwarf sized. I laughed my ass off. And then Ray Winstone, Nick Frost, Toby Jones, they all looked like dwarves. It was amazing, and it wasn't the forced perspective that that they used in the Lord of the Rings films. It was that they looked like they used CGI to shrink them down, kind of like we mentioned earlier with Steve Rogers in Captain America, or the whole Brad Pitt in that what the hell movie
World
he
War
was
Z.
in. But it looked really cool, and I thought the dwarves were handled really well. So on that front, I was impressed. All in all, I came out of the movie a little disappointed in some areas, really jazzed in others. I think it's, as Brian said, though, if you're going to see it and you really think you're only going to see it once, go to the theater. See it there. There are enough vistas and action scenes and effects shots that one time you see it should really be on a big screen. So I'd give it a 7 out of 10. I think I'm a lot higher on it than you guys are, but I'm also incredibly forgiving, especially for fairy tale type stories. I give a lot of leeway to that.
Not too far off. I mean, I gave it a 6. Brian gave it a 5. He gave it a 7. So,
Yeah.
looks good.
So there you go.
All right. Snow White and the Huntsman.